Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Danny Sarsak, and I'm a partner at Archetype. We're an early-stage crypto VC based in New York, where I lead our investments and research in the AI vertical. I'm fortunate to be joined today by a world-class lineup of speakers, and we're set to cover the state of decentralized AI and the opportunities for the application of AI in crypto. So guys, please join me up here today. As a quick starting point, just want to let each of our speakers give a brief overview and who they are and what it is they're building before we dive in. Matt, maybe we'll start with you.
Hey, everybody. Hear me? There we go. Matt Wright, CEO, co-founder of Gaia. We're building decentralized AI developer frameworks and an inference network for validating data in an AI landscape.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pramod Viswanath. I'm a core contributor at Sentient. I lead the research team there. I'm also a professor at Princeton University.
Hey guys, my name is Nick Emmons. I'm the co-founder at Allora, and we're building a decentralized collective intelligence network, essentially.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I want to start with an important overarching question, which is, over the last few years, the main themes that have shaped the fields of AI and deep learning have centered on incumbent scale and the centralization of critical resources, things like compute and energy and data. But we're beginning to see novel constraints emerge. And we're also benefiting from an open source AI stack that is increasingly on par with its closed source counterparts. And all of this, I think, is making us revisit a lot of the assumptions that we've long held about AI. I'd like to hear from each of you how you think about the major themes that are playing out today and the opportunity for decentralized infrastructure to play a much bigger role in the trajectory of AI going forward. And maybe, Nick, we'll start with you on that end.
Could I go second, actually? I was kind of occupied with it.
Yeah, no worries. Matt, let's go with you.
Yeah, so the way we're looking at it, if you crack open an open AI and look under the hood on, what it really takes to run some AI compute, there's the biggest components that are proliferating or unfolding in the DAI space. So there's compute, there's inference, there's data, dev tooling, dev frameworks. There's a whole ecosystem, finding corners of the market that, a few companies are trying to own that category and centralize AI or more, big AI. And so for us, we're more interested in leveraging what's already existing out there in open source. And so, we leverage large language models that, you can find on Hugging Face. There's about 1 million plus fine-tuned RAG-enabled models now. I'm sure in the future there will be other, ways to, train these models that, work for different use cases. But in our case, we have these large language models that when we pull together with different developer tools with our framework and different ways of compute and give end users and developers the opportunity to choose how they want to, engage with their AI, train their AI, potentially monetize their own data that they package inside this agent. We see a massive ecosystem unfolding where it's actually more collaborative than competitive as of now. Where every DAI company we talk to, it's like, oh, we could probably do this together. Or even if we're directly competing, having AI agents that are compatible and interoperable with one another is super important. Because in centralized AI, that's not the case. It is very competitive, and it's everyone fighting for this AGI future where we believe in a more collective intelligence and something that again is more interoperable, composable.
Pramod, please.
The question was about decentralized hardware, isn't it?
Around the opportunity for decentralized infrastructure to play a bigger role in the trajectory of AI going forward relative to what it's done historically.
Yeah, it's not something Sentient is focused on, but it's clearly, infrastructure is such an important aspect of AI development. We see this at We see this at, at every scale. At Princeton University, we've got a $300 million sort of infrastructure fund, the largest outside of outside of industry. And it's been a huge push for us to get to do research. And the same holds for smaller companies, getting out of the hegemony of just a few players. There are other participants in this space. I mean, Sentient would love to participate in any of them that provide infrastructure. Sentient focuses on offering a different type of decentralization, which is in terms of ideas and data and participation, and embedding native rights, property rights of participants, either because they provided the data, or they critiqued the data, or they could be inference. Any participation, like we call this the intelligence meritocracy, and building these kind of primitives, you may call them opcodes, AI native opcodes, and a corresponding virtual machine for AI structures. Infrastructure is a part of it. It's something we don't focus on, but we would love to partner.
Nick?
Yeah, I think decentralized networks in general are a useful means of codifying specific kind of market environments for the provisioning of different resources. And I think this can be applied at a sort of arbitrarily granular scale or at a broad scale. And I think what we're seeing take place in AI and what we'll continue to see to take place in AI is each of these core functions that contribute to the sort of provisioning of the components that lead to intelligence increasingly being provisioned via these decentralized, efficient market environments. We'll see compute better provisioned through decentralized market environments. We'll see data better provisioned, structured, et cetera, through decentralized network design. Intelligence, the models themselves being sort of provisioned and coordinated more effectively through markets. Markets are the greatest coordination mechanism that ever exists, and decentralized networks are a means of codifying markets in a more efficient and autonomous form factor. And that will enable this sort of alternative form factor to emerge to the kind of centralized form factor that we've seen take place or kind of take form over the past several decades.
Thanks, Nick. I love that answer. And I want to dive a little bit deeper here. We've seen already the emergence of a rival AI stack in crypto. And in a lot of ways, I think that makes sense. I mean, much of the work we've done in this space over the last decade lends itself well to AI. In some ways, feels inherently optimized to play a big role in AI. For example, our work in distributed systems, in trustless coordination mechanisms, in primitives for digitally native content and assets. But at the same time, a lot of it doesn't necessarily lend itself well to AI. For example, the exorbitant costs associated with bringing large-scale compute on-chain, inefficient consensus mechanisms, or perhaps the rigid, deterministic nature of smart contracts themselves. I'd love to hear from each of you how you think about how the end-to-end blockchain stack as it exists today maps over well to AI, and perhaps whether there's one major area in crypto today that still needs to get re-architected or otherwise built to enable decentralized on-chain AI to realize its full potential. Pramod, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. This is very close to my heart. My very first, old flame was wireless networks. I was closely involved right out of my PhD. I'm an old timer from Web 1 days. We call this Web 3, but I'm around from 2000s. And that was sort of our first startup was about, and our pitch deck was, imagine you could do email on your phone. And those days phones were built for phone calls and the internet was happening. And so I'm very passionate about building networks that scale and architectures. That particular startup did well. It became 4G LTE. And ever since I'm hooked on building infrastructure and designing and building infrastructure that plumbing of the world, of the information world. And the biggest need today in terms of infrastructure is to having the mechanisms to collect data, to build train models on them, the whole AI pipeline, from data collection, curation, to training, to inference, to monetization and governance. The whole cycle has to be architected at the same spirit as the finest infrastructures that we have seen, which are in the information age, which is the internet or maybe 4G wireless. I mean, I was not around when internet was already there when I started, but I was a good part of wireless developments. So we wrote a white paper on this, like maybe a research paper, you could say, as a scientist, bringing out the design architectures and the framework associated with what decentralized or what would be design principles that would let various aspects, I said, talked about collecting data, there are people involved, governance is something else, transactions, which is like market space, there are different aspects. So how do you design the space so that you can have different layers that work with sort of minimal interconnectivity? At the same time, they could be optimized and worked on by different people. Each of the networks I gave examples of, the internet and 4G, were designed precisely in this way. If you think of like wireless stack, you have every leaf of every tree bounces radio waves. But you can't let that bother with some packets on the internet, not to mention whether it's video or audio. I mean, the separations are clearly needed. And at Sentient, that's one of our core innovations from a scientific or a network design perspective of separating. The key design, now I set it up, maybe I'll say just one thing about what these key insights are. The key insight is to sort of separate out what I call transport, which is data, collection, inference, separating that collection of the data and training from inference, which has to do with infrastructure, separating that with two aspects, which is transaction monetization. Transactions, in other words, or AI transactions are like prompts. I mean, you count them. Separate that from governance. Right now, they're all vertically integrated. You go to OpenAI, which is closed AI, fully integrated. They collect their data, basically scrape the entire thing off the internet, trained it, proprietary methods, and offer it as a service with an API call or a chatbot service. And they also have to deal with the governance with it. Like a woke model or anti-woke model, this kind of governance aspects. And at Sentient, we are building, we designed, and we've already written this kind of research papers, and building a network structure that separates out these 4 different components. And it's in the spirit of the internet. Internet was also a layered architecture, same with wireless. It's in this grand spirit of decades of network building.
Nick?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think the key is building in this kind of modular form factor. I think there's some slight distinction or some slight differences between the sort of layers of the stack that I see as being the layers of the stack versus what maybe you see the layers of this AI stack being. But I think the sort of fundamental point is the most important in that building networks is a fundamentally complex task. You're trying to coordinate actors to perform some sort of action. And when you start embedding this sort of verticalization into networks, you start needing to coordinate many heterogeneous actors to complete many heterogeneous tasks. This complexity of these networks compounds quite rapidly when you start trying to build, I guess, monolithically or vertically. And that leads to major inefficiencies, major design compromises, et cetera. And so I think the key here is to kind of build each layer of the AI stack in as sort of tightly scoped and as modular of a fashion as possible. There's problems to solve within each layer of the stack, but in doing that, it kind of focuses our problem area on a much more tractable space than if we were to build monolithically and try to support everything in a kind of single vertical stack.
Yeah, and the way we see it from Gaia, we have the framework and all the components needed to have your own AI agent and eventually autonomous agents. We'll talk about that later. But we basically took that framework and we threw it out to a bunch of developers in Web3, and we started to see kind of the learning process of the end state that we're looking for. So, in some years' time, we want something that looks a lot like what we experienced with ChatGPT or with Claude or like any of these other centralized AI, applications that are super useful in our daily lives. And even the stuff you don't see as an interface, the stuff that's just an API call. We put that out there and we're like, how do we on the back end enable for the incentivization of the data that's provided in a more specific context for the output? And from there, we started putting the hands of developers and seeing that, they were with our software, you're able to run it on your local, hardware, GPU, CPU, cloud instance. We have an application runtime that enables it to operate similarly in different environments. But seeing how they would host compute across AWS, now they're starting to trigger and be like, oh, I want to decentralize my compute. How do I talk to Filecoin ecosystem or one of these more decentralized hosting or serving companies, and And then even like the inference side, they're now saying, well, okay, I'm sitting on all this raw, on-chain or text data, media data, IP. How do I train that agent on that now? How do I monetize? And so for us, we're kind of reverse engineering what the future end state is. And so, we want to get there. Right now, we're like, we're still here, but the problems we're identifying clearly are, compute. How do I properly decentralize this so that it's performant, but it's also, hitting the principles of Web3 and decentralized networks. How do we encourage the incentivization and the monetization of one's data? And so those questions are coming to us, and so we're creating more of a feedback loop on how do we really build out the infrastructure with our community.
Thank you, Matt. And I think that segues really well into the next one I want to ask about, which is the thing on top of a lot of people's minds. What exactly is an agent? How would you define it? And what will it mean for an agent to be truly autonomous? And to what extent does that differ than it does necessarily in Web 2?
Can I say something about
Please,
this?
go ahead.
Autonomous refers to the fact that it has sovereignty. Another word people say is sort of sovereign. And the main thing that I want to, it's obviously connected to crypto in the sense that once it's a smart contract, it gets executed and there's commitments and you can't take back. So that comes with it. But I want to say, that's just true of any action, not just AI agents. But there's one critical aspect of AI which is something that I relate to as an autonomous or sovereignty is the word we call loyalty. That is, an agent is loyal to the governance principles or the covenants of the community that owned it or that trained it. Think of it as Bill of Rights or a constitution for a community that generated it. And today this aspect is kind of mixed up. Some people call it AI safety, and then it leads to a whole bunch of I already alluded to it. You can have a blue Californian model, or a blue Austin but a red Texan models. Governance is inherently as diverse as we humans are. And autonomous aspects or sovereignty really alludes to being respectful or obeying the principles espoused by the community that trained that. And by not just training literally as training the model, but also collected the data and whoever is the owner. And at Sentient, we call this sort of programmable safety. We use the word loyalty and building loyal models and making sure that there is a way to describe what the constitution is or what the principles are and obeying them in a AI native way. And having crypto roots there is some things that we think a lot at Sentient. And building the underlying science and the tech to embed such loyalty roots directly into the model itself is a kind of a new branch of cryptography we work on.
So for us, autonomy and agents, we see it as a system that can intake some information, analyze, act, and then perhaps learn on that data. In Web3, what's interesting on the acting side, we now can give keys to these agents through wallets. And so I had a long conversation with some folks yesterday from Lit Protocol and MetaMask about what happens when we give agents wallets. Something I've been thinking through is this ends up becoming the next world's largest unbanked population of agents that want wallets, that want identities, that want reputation systems. And so we see this really cool paradigm with blockchain and AI where they're not sentient, but I think we can have collective governance and smart contract level agreements on what these agents can do, perhaps how they can spend money, perhaps which groups they can participate into, what actions they can conduct. And for them to constantly learn those processes, could be something very entirely different from an off-chain autonomous agent, from even like a centralized AGI future. I think it could be something that is more collaborative.
Nick, similar vein here. I'm curious how you think about what the model layer is going to look like in crypto and how that's going to develop, and particularly how that'll differ from the model ecosystem that is solidifying today in Web 2.
Sure, yeah. So I think just to set a sort of common understanding or common consensus around what that is, I think the model layer of this decentralized AI stack is the layer by which many different ML models, many different instances of intelligence can sort of come together and coordinate to produce some sort of aggregated or sort of more performance source of intelligence. And I think this differs from how models are sort of constructed and interacted with today, because we have this paradigm by which a few massive monoliths accumulate as much sort of raw resources as possible that contribute to creating good models, data, compute. They train a model, they produce some useful form of intelligence, and it sort of exists in this silo. And this creates a market dynamic by which the kind of most intelligent models are always in the hands of these very small number of market participants. What the model layer enables, what decentralized networks pointed at the problem of intelligence provisioning specifically can do, is enable many more smaller, more specialized, tightly scoped models to coordinate with one another, learn off of one another to create a more performant source of I guess, collective intelligence. This can improve at a far faster rate. This breaks down the barriers or the silos that models live in today. It harnesses market dynamics and points them at what is today a very nebulous resource, but it is what is increasingly becoming one of the most valuable and impactful resources in society. And so I think that's sort of how the model layer comes to be. I think it leads us to a future by which efficient market dynamics can exist for intelligence provisioning, where many, many models can contribute to a collective whole. I don't think the optimal future is one where there's a single or small number of models that are attempting to be dominant in every domain. Intelligence is heterogeneous, and therefore it needs to be provisioned heterogeneously.
No, that's great, Nick. Can I rephrase what you just said, which is that the models are closer to Lego bricks rather than microwaves. Microwaves are, you just buy it off the box, plug it in, and push the buttons. Models are closer to Lego bricks. I mean, you build them, compose them, mix with other models, and specialize them, put your own data. I mean, you build things out of it. And that's brilliantly true. The one aspect that, as I was thinking through this, that's a great insight, right? One aspect that I was thinking is that Lego makes all the bricks themselves, so they know how to monetize it. But the entire point of models as the Lego bricks is the heterogeneity. Different people provide it. And what incentive do people have to keep providing these aspects? Who owns? If I create an edifice out of my kid is into Legos, so I think of this all the time. I mean, of course, he invented and put them in some special way. So obviously he owns something, but somebody else built those individual bricks. Who owns this, and how do you divide this, fractionalize it? And also notice that these rights, Lego bricks have to be given away. You can't hold it. In other words, it has to be open, yet monetizable, yet governable or loyal. And if you don't mind my putting on a professorial hat here, all models today are either open, actually this is very general, either open, like Hugging Face, or closed, like OpenAI, completely hidden. And neither of them act like Lego bricks. I mean, the Hugging Face one kind of acts like Lego bricks. You can download it and fine-tune it. But this is no scalable way to keep on growing that ecosystem. And we've been inventing, so now this is the professorial hat. So if you look at models from just a purely, like a model layer, purely from a file, you have .onnx, .py, .tf, .safetf. These are like a file formats for representing these models. And what we've been promulgating at Sentient and largely sort of research breakthroughs is what we call .oml. It's a file format, but also like an SSH client that you download the model, it's given away like free, you put it, you integrate it, you fine-tune it, do whatever you want. But it doesn't work very well unless you make a very quick call to the owner of the model, get a signature on your prompt, come back, and then it works. Otherwise, it doesn't work as well. So the monetization and other person will sign, presumably, because the owner will sign, presumably, because either you're paying some fee for it, for the usage, or and using it for the right loyal reasons. And so this is something, a core part of this heterogeneity that Nick alluded to, that we've been inventing. I mean, this has been a core focus for me as a scientist and as an engineer to build. This should be a public resource. OML should be a crypto library. .oml is a crypto library, yet a machine learning library. So it should be embedded in Torch later this year.
It's a fascinating answer. Thank you, Pramod. To wrap things up here, I want to ask an important question, which is, today we've talked about how crypto rails and the ecosystem that we've built in this space has the opportunity to transform AI, create more efficient markets for the allocation and the supply of compute and of data and of talent and human contribution, to incentivize the creation of intelligence at a much bigger scale and globally distributed than we can in the centralized setting. All of this suggests that crypto can be the home of the most transformative applications of AI in the coming decade. Given this, I'm curious how you all think about what crypto AI's Uniswap moment might look like in the next few years. In other words, that moment where we see clear evidence of a breakout killer use case at scale that couldn't have existed otherwise without the application, or in this case, the combination of these two novel technologies. And it could happen at the infrastructure or the middleware layer or the application layer. But I want to open it to you guys to hear how you think about this.
Got two mics. Thank you. So again, very biased is coming from Gaia, like the future we see. But if you look at a lot of the OpenAI lawsuits coming out from like a lot of these publications, hundreds of years of their writings being utilized by centralized AI, that data is being captured, perhaps being used elsewhere. It's up in the air. Like folks can't really see inside the black box. A world that we see is perhaps we can turn any company into an AI company. We can have their data trained on their own LLMs, their own machine learning with their own data, and then they can find ways to monetize it. Again, I talked about it earlier, but breaking that down and reverse engineering it as Lego blocks, what would it look like if you went to your publication, your New York Times, your Wall Street Journal, and there's a GPT feature, and you pay a subscription to interact with it, and on the back end, it's talking to decentralized nodes of data that have been trained or incentivized from that company, and then perhaps those could be APIs that are talking to other publications. Could be, you want to create a new work that collaborates with the style of Wall Street Journal and the TIE data. This is something that folks would be willing to pay for, and it really cuts out the middleman for end users and developers that want to access these kind of features. And it could be, the payment could be, if we're gonna go very Web3, you could pay for some subscription that it's like a minted NFT, and it's like now your membership to access this AI, technology. And again, it's maintaining the data with the actual IP owner, and it's helping them monetize it in a way that hasn't been done before. That's what we see, at least.
Nick?
Yeah, I think crypto is a great sort of substrate for economic coordination. AI is the most deflationary, expressive technology to ever exist. I think the Uniswap moment for AI is sort of the terminal state of these two technologies, frankly, is going to be thousands and thousands, eventually millions of AI agents all coordinating with one another directly via this shared economic substrate. We're going to be a somewhat sort of passive or secondary participant in this Uniswap moment, but what we'll quickly start to see is these sort of armies of agents spawned, each with their own world perspectives, theses, mandates, whatever it is, sort of exploring the totality of future trajectories that they can explore in a completely unbounded and decentralized financial environment. And I think the rate at which that scales and that diversifies is going to happen quite rapidly and at a scale that is sort of difficult to conceptualize right now. So I think that is the Uniswap moments. Agents sort of taking the driver's seat of the kind of financial interactions of the world.
Great. I mean, that's entirely possible. Looking forward to the future. But I'm trying something different at Sentient. There's tremendous intelligence as humans. We ourselves, in fact, one way to think of it is our humans as an animal species as nature's AI, and put basic rules, basic building blocks, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, simple rules of biochemistry, and put them under evolutionary pressures. Both short-term, eat and don't be eaten, and long-term, propagate your genes. And out comes intelligence, like basically us. We are nature's AI. And the natural thing we are built for is to build the next generation of AI. And if I look at it in this lens, AI progression is just part of the same evolutionary process. And one of the things we are doing at Sentient is to speed this up through what Nick just said. Crypto is great at putting capital in. and in a programmable, highly programmable, efficient, incentive way. And we've been driving what we call campaigns. If any of you are in the Bay Area this Sunday, coming Sunday, please participate in our werewolf tournament, where as kids or even as adults, you may play this party game, Mafia, and all AI agents do terribly. It involves subterfuge. It involves knowing that subterfuge is happening and sort of game theory, you know, spy versus spy, and AI is nowhere near it. And kids do very well. My kid fashions himself as a pretty good Mafia player. Come participate in our werewolf tournament. And the goal is to build AI that kills, you know, as a werewolf, but also to train the next generation of AI that can get even better at this game. And this is something I want to take it to scale. There's $1 trillion in crypto sort of market cap to build the next biggest sort of intelligence, you know, 2 to the power of AI to come.
Thank you. Matt, Pramod, Nick, thank you very much. This was a fascinating conversation. Appreciate you taking the time.